if the tenant says that they cannot do more than 10,000 a month, in sales, but the landlord says that he believes they could do 12,000, does that mean that they get, for instance, if it's at 10%, is it 10% of the overall profit, or 10%?
No, 10% of the incremental.
For the example of borders, just want to mention the percentage rent, that's above the good points. But here it falls below 5.5 million.
Yeah, this was a unique situation where the landlord, I think, was trying to tenant the property so they could refi. And so Borders was concerned that they wouldn't generate enough sales. So they said, okay, we'll pay you whatever, the $11 a foot rent, but if our sales drop, we want to, we're not confident we're going to be able to be successful. We want the ability to convert to percentage rent. It's the inverse.
But in that case, they will take a percentage of what?
Of their sales.
Of the sales. But in that case, what about the per point? What's the per point?
5.5 million. So landlord thinks you're going to do 5.5 million or more. No problem. Borders is concerned, and if your sales drop, they want the ability to convert to percentage rent. That's not on the homework. So if it's confusing, I can tell you that's not on the homework. It's not on the exam. It's not the inverse of the percentage rent. This happens to be a little bit of a unique situation.
But
this is very rare.
If the sales above the 5.5 million, what will the product?
Then they pay the base rent, the $11. Yeah.
So is there a difference between going dark and going out of business?
Yeah, when you go dark, you still pay the rent. When you go out of business, you're not paying anything, technically. But even when you go into bankruptcy, there are laws that say you have to pay the rent.
Could you explain what go dark mean?
Yeah, so if you have a tenant, let's use Borders, right? Let's say that their sales drop to $4 million, and then they drop to $3 million. And their operating expenses are, say, $4 million, right? So now they can't even cover operating expenses. So they may say, you know what, it doesn't make sense for us to stay here. Like, we'll pay the rent. Well, in this case, they don't have to pay anything because, well, they'll pay percentage of their sales. But if they say they just go dark, meaning they just vacate and turn off the lights. You're not going to vacate with the lights on because then you want to pay electricity, right? So you turn the lights off, so the tenant's going dark, but they're still paying rent. It's just a slang or vernacular term for that to describe that circumstance.
Will there ever be a scenario where, oh, I guess that's sublease, you can sublease.
You can sublease, yeah. Yeah. Now, sometimes, and this is just going off a little bit of a tangent, that there's what's called an operating covenant, where tenants don't have a right to go dark, or it triggers a big penalty. Because it hurts the center. So let's talk about sales. I think we talked about a little bit in the last class. So there's a concept called occupancy cost. You definitely 100% need to know this. Rent plus recoveries divided by sales. Base rent plus recoveries or reimbursements divided by sales will give you a ratio, percentage. Depending on the type of tenant that you are, there's certain ranges that that letters in that tenant is in good financial health or not. That's also known as a health ratio. So for grocery stores, you want to be sub 5%. Their margins are very thin. With a grocer, it's like 1%, sometimes less. And so you want to make sure they have a lower occupancy cost. The lower the occupancy cost, the stronger the health of the tenant. Lower is better for occupancy cost. Does that mean you're making more profit? So I'll tell you one time I violated this and paid a price. Yes. So I did a deal in Chicago with Jeffrey's Plaza, was the name of the loan. And we had I forget who the grocer was, Dominic's. And Dominic's had a 7% occupancy cost. For like the last 5 to 10 years, it was like 7 flat. They had been there forever, they had a lot of term. It was the only grocer within, I think, 5 or 10 miles. It's kind of remember the concept of food deserts. And we knew it was above our threshold, but we thought it was good risk. So we talked about the credit board. We thought it was definitely splintering, but we liked the occupancy, and we liked the assets. They had been there forever. I kid you not, literally less than 30 days after I closed the loan, Domino's was owned by Safeway, and they shut down the entire chain because of occupancy costs. Yeah, didn't feel good. Did not feel good at all. And so we ended up re-tenanting it with another grocer. But it took time. So that was a tough day. I could not believe. It was literally, I think, 2 to 3 weeks after we closed the loan, we got a letter from Safeway saying they were shutting it down in 90 days. There was no way to know that. But there's a reason why these guidelines are here. They're not just made up. So, if you write enough loans, they're not all of them are going to perform as agreed. So that was one I highlighted, and we violated our norm. It ended up being okay, but it got messy, and it was definitely not what we thought was going to happen. So big box retailers, they have bigger margins, so you can underwrite to a higher occupancy cost. And the inline tenants, especially the mall, have higher margins. That's why they can afford to pay higher rent. So you can afford to underwrite them to even higher occupancy costs than the big box retailers. So big box retailers, this is the Borders, this is the Kohl's, this is the Costco's of the world. Those need to be 8 to 10%. The inlines in a mall, 12 to 14. Department stores, much like grocery stores, run very thin margins. Assuming they have sales today, because the department stores are suffering. Macy's just came out and had really, really poor sales. Target, on the other hand, had really good sales. So everybody understand the concept of occupancy cost? Rent plus recovery is divided by sales. You need to know it. So how do we apply that? So let's look at our now new tenant, Costco. PY here is prior year 1, prior year 2, prior year 3. And we're looking for trends. One data point, if you just have one data point, it's sort of like, okay, if it's really good or really bad, does that tell you the whole story? Probably not. You want to have at least 2 or 3 years of sales. So if you look at it, 3 years ago it was at 10, 2 years ago it was at 7. The trend is really, really good. I would have no problem here getting comfortable underwriting the Costco. In fact, I'd be very excited about it. Borders, we've already decided we're not going to underwrite it, but it goes from 10 to 8.2, which is good, and then it spikes up to 12.3, which is really bad. Best Buy is kind of flat. I don't like this trend from 9 to 10, but it was 10, then it was 9. I would underwrite that income. So that is a big box. It's 8 to 10%. They're at the top end of the range. Probably okay. Especially if, I'd probably look at a couple other data points to get comfortable. Are they paying below market rent? there any other Best Buy stores that have opened up? When does their lease expire? If the answer is if we're playing below market rent, there's not another Best Buy for 5 miles, and the lease goes out for a while, I would be comfortable. If 2 new Best Buys opened up, around the corner, or one on the north side of town, one on the south side, and we're paying above market rent, and our lease expires in 2 years, I probably would have a hard time with this. I probably would count the income, but I would need to have a special reserve, because I wouldn't think they're going to renew. Yes?
Would you classify like a Walmart and Costco as a big box retailer, or what category do they?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd probably give the name credit to. I've never done a deal with Walmart as a tenant. I've done it as a shadow anchor, where they're next to the center, because Walmart typically owns the real estate. Costco, yes. Because Costco has a huge grocery component, people go there every day, drives a lot of foot traffic. And somewhere? Yes.
For the Costco, the trend, the OCC trend is increasing each year.
It's going down. So this is 3 years ago, is it 10? And then it trends down to today, 6.2, so the lower the number, the better. Yes?
If I have one like Best Buy, I would choose or I would use the highest of the 3, where it goes up, where it's up and goes down and goes back up. Is that right?
You're looking at the trend, this is subjective. Depends on how much of the volatility, then you start to, as a good underwriter, would want to go, why? Maybe there was something that was unique that happened that was negative, that caused negative sales, and then you're like, okay, well, that's not going to happen again. Maybe there was a fire or something like that, right, that impacted sales. Or some sort of structural issue, and then just affected the store, operations. If nothing affected them and there was huge volatility, you kind of scratch your head a little bit and then figure out. And again, you could find a reason, almost a reason to do or not do any loan. You could find a reason to do or not buy any property. You can talk yourself in or you can talk yourself out. Depends on your risk profile and how much risk you're willing to take on. Questions?
For Best Buy, I know because there's only 2 years left in the lease, we're going to count it as 0. Is that 2 years? Is that is there in the guidelines? Is there a specific year where you do that, or is it sort of our judgment?
It's judgment. It's judgment, and we're not counting it as 0 because it expires in 2 years. It's just because they're bankrupt. It's their credit. It's a credit issue, not a lease expiration issue per se. Everybody get the concept of occupancy cost? Let's talk about rollover. And I don't think we had gotten to this page. So, rollover has to do when leases expire, leases rollover, as I mentioned before. And you're going to look at it differently for the anchor and for the inline. There's usually more turnover or rollover with inline than with anchor. 1, the leases tend to be shorter. 2, anchors are typically national tenants, which in theory are more stable, not always. And so they have more what I call stickiness. So when you're underwriting, there's 136,000 square feet. This is the anchor tenant assumptions. If I had to get a new anchor tenant for the border space, I'm going to have to at least offer $30 in TI. This is something you're going to get from the appraisal, from a market report. I don't know if you guys use from CoStar or RCA Analytics. It could be CBRE, it could be Cushman. There's no shortage of market reports that talk about minimum TI and LC. If I need to renew a tenant, an anchor tenant, I don't have to put as much TI in. A lot of times, especially if you want, as a landlord, you want to keep that tenant happy, and the tenant makes a request, they want to do some upgrades to the space, whether it's for lighting or fix a roof or, whatever, you as a landlord are more than happy to accommodate, especially if you're keeping a long-term credit tenant, net cash flow flowing. And that is usually, in rough numbers, usually half. So on a new lease, if for the borders space, I'm gonna, as a landlord, is gonna need to pay 6%. Could be 5, could be a little bit less. It's typically 6. And again, this is all gonna come from a market report. What I'm giving you is the kind of what's the industry standard. And for renewals, some landlords pay on renewals, some don't. It depends on the lease structure. As a lender, we always underwrite it, because if you don't and it ends up being a cost and the borrower can't pay, then it becomes problematic. But if they won't come out of pocket. The lease term for an anchor tenant is typically longer. It takes a lot more for them to get set up and to run their business, and they want to make sure they have enough term. So then this all gets blended into, we're going to assume 65% of the anchors renew and 35% don't. And we're going to apply the $30 TI to the new space and the $15 to the renewal, and same thing for the TIs and for the commissions, and that will all blend to $20.25 for the TIs and 4% for the leasing commissions, and it's based on an average in-place rent of $11.58, and that comes from the rent roll. So we're looking, if you have to replace a tenant, this is what we're estimating what it's gonna cost. I have no idea, the landlord has no idea. It's a lot of times the tenants have no idea whether they're gonna vacate or renew, say 5 years from now when their lease rolls, because it depends on how their sales are. Depends on if they've found a better spot in the market that might help them drive more sales. Or they're just crushing it here and they're going to want to renew instead. So we have to make, as lenders, we have to make assumptions. I know 100% are not going to leave, or I'm going to make an assumption that not everybody's going to leave, but not everybody's going to stay. So for anchor tenants, the rule of thumb is 65% renewal rate. Conversely, for the inline, we're going to assume that it's going to have 50% rollover. You could go up a little bit higher. I would look at the historicals, because this is a stabilized asset, you'll have operating history that you can tap into. And so I would ask what the renewal probability has been historically in this asset, and then compare it to whatever report you're relying on, and see if you're in market, you're outperforming, underperforming, and then you can make an informed decision on your renewal probability. 50 is a fair number. You could make an argument you could go up to 60 or 65. I would not go over 65 for anything. And it costs less money to bring in new tenants, and the renewals are less. The commissions are the same, and the lease terms are typically shorter. Lease terms for an inline tenant are typically 3 to 5 years. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter, sometimes 3 to 5 years with 2 or 3 5-year renewal options. And then we got to calculate, this is the only thing I'm going to ask you guys to do in terms of the modeling. I have another model that will do it all for you. So if you don't know how to do it yourself, it's not hard. The formulas are fairly complicated. Not that you couldn't figure it out, but I wanted to keep it simple. So for the rent roll on the home market, I'm going to have you divide up the rollover by year. You can see here, this is the rollover year 2018, 2019, 2020. It's a little bit dated, I know we're in 2019, but assume that we're in 2018 for right now, or 2017. And then you're going to calculate, you're going to group it, so you'll sort by maturity date, or lease expiration date. And then you'll group you'll cut and paste into here, and figure out what the TIs and LCs are. And so you'll see for borders, for the TI, you're taking 35,000 square feet times 30 bucks. So we're assuming that we're going to get a new anchor tenant, we're going to need to pay 30 bucks a foot for that tenant. And then for leasing commissions, we're going to take 35,000 square feet times the rent, times the term, times the percentage of the leasing commission, which is 6 for a new tenant. What doesn't this include? Yes, downtown. And, bonus question. Free rent. So a lot of times with leases, and then there's usually a trade-off with TIs, and free rent. But usually there's some combination of both. The landlord will put in 30 bucks, 50 bucks, 100 bucks, whatever it is, and then they'll give them 3 months, 6 months of free rent, 3 or 6 months of free rent, could be a year. It's all the landlord solving for a yield on cost. So when the tenant is in place and paying versus the cost, the land, they're usually targeting something like, somewhere between 8 to 12%. I'm not going to have you calculate all that, the free rent stuff. I'm just letting you know it's a little bit more involved. So here, this just adds up the TIs and LCs. This would go into a special reserve because we're assuming Borders is 100% vacant. Because we're getting TIs and LCs on the entire space. Now I have a note here to discuss carving up the space. You could look at this and say, you know what, it's not 35,000 square feet times 30 bucks times 30 a foot. I'm just doing this so you can see the calculation. Maybe you say, you know what, we're going to divide this into thirds, and it would only be 10 bucks a foot if it was an inline space. It would be a large inline space at 10,000 square feet. That's a subjective thing, and again, I'm okay with whatever way you want to approach it. I just want you to explain your thought process. Either one is fine. So then you're going to do the same thing for so you're going to take the blend on the others. Borders, we took the 35,000 square feet, and we took the TIA for new tenants. Here we're going to take the blend because it factors in the renewal probability. So instead of taking $10 a foot for the sports memorabilia space that expires, let's say, that's this year, we're going to take a blend and we're going to take 7.5 because it takes in the renewal probability into account. Because I don't know if they're going to stay or they're going to go. And by the way, you don't always have sales. It's great when you do. Sometimes you're flying blind in the lender. And you have to make an assumption. You have to figure out where you're comfortable.
For the spots, why we use lender for the border use new tenant?
Right, because the Borders, we know they're out of business.
Wow.
We know they're vacant, so we know we're going to have to re-tenant the whole space today. And that, I think I have this in a special reserve. Yeah, so Borders on your source, if you have something like that out on the homeowner, and you know what, this tenant is bankrupt, we're going to have to re-tenant this whole space. I'm not taking the blended amount, I'm taking the full amount, because I know they're going to be gone, I would have a special reserve for that. And you put that into your uses, in the sources and uses. I only do the special reserve if I'm accounting 100%, because it doesn't factor into of the cash flow underwriting. We're going to get to how we look at everything else in totality in just a second. Everybody understand that? If you're saying, you know what, this tenant is bankrupt, I have to re-tenant the 100% of the space, I need a special reserve, that special reserve goes in your sources and uses for that tenant. So reserves, there's a special borders reserve. We're going to talk about a general rollover to make sure that we have the full amount. I'm going to go through that next. You don't have to have a special reserve for every tenant. There's a way to look at everything in total. So do you guys understand, is it making sense on how to set this up? I would take this template, but you're going to sort your rent roll by expiration date, and then populate this table with those tenants. So you'll look at Pearl Vision for TI is taking their space times the blended amount. Same thing for the nail place, because that 750 takes into account the renewal probability. So if you assume this was, let's say, 60 instead of 50, that brings the blend down a little bit. Went from 750 to 7. So then you'll total up, I'll just show you the formula real quick for TIs and LCs. This is an inline, it's inline, it's not an anchor. We're taking the blended amount, which is the 4.5%. Because we just don't know. That's the way a lender sort of makes an assumption about, rollover. I've never had a model tied exactly to reality. I don't think. Because you just don't know. One leaves, one doesn't. You just don't know who's going to leave and when. So you're going to do that for every year. And then we're going to get to, okay, we have all this data done by a year. What does this mean? And so for year one, we know that we have a minimum TI and LC, right, from our underwriting guidelines. Let's say for this it's $1. So it's $1 per square foot. So we're going to collect, and this number should tie to your underwritten cash flow. See how this is 50 cents each? This number is $1. I have it as blue as a plug so we can play with it in class, but you could link it if you wanted. So you don't make sure it all ties in place. So I know that every year I'm going to collect $177,630. I need in year one $1,352,000. Now where did that number come from? That number came from year one here. We figure out for all the tenants that are expiring, I need $1,352,000. Both of that obviously is quarters. So I add what I'm collecting. I'm subtracting actually what I'm collecting from my need. So I know that I'm short. You guys can see the negative there of $1,174,000 and change. That number goes up here is the prior year balance for year two. I'm collecting the same $177,630. So if you notice, that is consistent throughout the loan term. That's just a constant. But this year, in year two, and you're going to link that here. I only need $141,000 versus the big $1,350,000. So when you net those three numbers together, you know, it's this negative, you know, that gets lowered by, you know, 177,630, but then you add in 141,000. Now I'm short at the end of year 2, $1,138,000. Yes.
Does TILC collections just represent the amount that you're reserving? What does collection mean?
That means that, yeah, it's the amount that you're collecting and reserving for this class will be the same. Or, you know, what you're underwriting. So you're gonna underwrite what you collect. There, you can get a little tricky with and help the borrower sometimes. I'm going off on a tangent where you can collect less than you underwrite.
And that flows to what was the tab that should link to? I know you hard-coded it there, but.
Oh, this dollar per foot is linked to our underwriting. So this is, we're gonna come here, this is the sizing sheet with the cash flows and figure out, you know, how much we can lend. But as we figure out our underwritten cash flow, this number here, this is the TI and LC collection. So what we're underwriting in the cash flow should tie exactly to the penny to the rollover. So if you're underwriting, you know, let's say $1.25, you need to know to change this to $1.25. Yeah.
And how do you get that dollar? How are you accounting for how much you collect with TI? Is it just the market or?
Yeah, there's market, that's what the guidelines are for, that spreadsheet. So, and that spreadsheet sometimes evolves, right? Whereas the market gets more aggressive or less aggressive, you know, then you may get an update, you know, where you were collecting $1.50 and now it's $1.25, and sometimes it goes to $1, and that's just where the market is. So if you don't, you won't be competitive, you won't win loans.
Can you explain that again? So you're because of the guidelines, you put in $1 here, but I'm still not sure how that correlates to the cash flow tab.
So this tab is, we're trying to figure out, are we collecting enough with our underwritten number? Are we collecting enough? We have enough at the end of every year. You know, the short answer is no, right? We're gonna, and this is a way to figure that out, right? This is during the 10 years of the loan term. This is a snapshot of 1 year. This is the underwritten cash flow that we're going to use to size the loan. So within that underwritten cash flow, you have, this is TI and LC. This is TI, this is LC. So this is what we're underwriting. So this is, you can see here, 177,630.
Okay.
Right, so that's in our underwritten cash flow. That should tie to the penny to our rollover, which then projects that out over 10 years to figure out, do we have enough in TI and LC collection? The short answer for this is no.
Okay.
Right, because these big negative numbers need to be solved. Because otherwise, if we didn't solve for that, the borrower would have to come out of pocket. And even if we made that a guarantee, if the borrower didn't have the money, then what do? Then you have a mess.
So you may look at that shortfall along with your excess cash flow and decide you upsize the loan by 500,000 and then you're capturing the balance if you have that
You can do
at the
that.
end of the day.
As long as you don't exceed, you know, LTV thresholds and, you know, debt yield and, you know, there's usually some wiggle room there. Yes.
Except for the free program, do we need to consider about some rollover period?
I'm not sure I understood the second question.
Do we still need to consider about the rollover period?
Well, there's rollover every year. So the period that the big period that we're looking at is the loan term, which is 10 years. But then we're breaking it down on an annual basis.
I mean, how long will it take to find the new?
Oh, downtime. It depends on the market. It depends on the market. You know, when I was, you know, working in a REIT, and I know I've talked to other people in the market, from start to finish, between the time you identify a tenant and the time you sign a lease and do all the work where they're paying you rent, it's like 18 months.
But we don't consider this, I consider,
What's that?
we don't consider this in.
No. I think there's enough moving pieces without adding that to that. I just wanted you to note that that's something you need to factor in real life. But I've got enough calculations going on for you guys, I just didn't want to add more to it. If we want, we can. So for year 3, it's the same thing. It takes the balance from year 2, these are our collections every year, this is what we need for year 3. That number gets linked to year 3. And we do that for the 10 years. What I usually do is I look for the biggest shortfall, so this is $1,372,000. And then you figure out do I still have negatives? You could do it, you could goal seek it and figure out, okay, how do I get this to, you look at the biggest shortfall, how do you get the biggest shortfall to 0? So maybe this number is $1,500,000.